Hi there, I am Dr. Gwanya-Mdletye, and today I'd like us to chat about serious mental illness as a disability within the workplace. Now, when someone presents at work in a wheelchair, it's very rarely that you'll hear it questioned that they actually live with a disability. However, when someone who struggles with mental illness, for instance, cannot get out of bed because they're severely depressed, or cannot face certain exposures in the workplace because of a condition like post-traumatic stress disorder, it's often questioned, and the impression can come across as being very dismissive, as though this person is not actually struggling. Yet, mental illness is one of the most common silent or invisible disabilities in the workplace, and yet it's most commonly questioned. Truth is, mental illness can be just as disabling as physical illness or as physical impairment. And illnesses like schizophrenia, like bipolar disorder, like post-traumatic disorder, these can have symptoms that are in fact so debilitating that they either limit one's participation within the workplace and are thus impairing, or they can completely preclude one from employment. However, within the workplace, it's important that we bear in mind, when we make considerations regarding people with disabilities, that there are people with mental disabilities whose effects are not external, whose effects are internal, whose effects and whose symptoms are experienced by the person, but we cannot see them. And when I say we, I mean those who are observing from the outside. Illnesses whose course fluctuate whilst they are severely debilitating, right? And I think the fluctuating course is one that very often throws people off when it comes to the disability related to mental illness. So let's talk about disclosure, right? Because I've come across situations where employers are quite dismissive of the mental illness, or kind of say, why didn't they disclose that they have a mental illness. So disclosure can be very tricky, can be very complex when it comes to mental illness, and it can feel quite risky, because telling their employer that they have a mental illness can be intimidating for the person living with mental illness. And they'll ask themselves questions like, what if I'm fired as a result of this? Or what if I'm passed over for promotions, right? What if I am seen as unreliable, as an unreliable member of the team, and so on and so on. So these questions that people living with mental illness, these are questions that people living with mental illness will often have in the back of their mind when they grapple with whether or not to disclose regarding their mental illness to their employer. So this is not something that is not a decision that is taken lightly. It's not a decision that comes by easily. In many cases, actually, those fears are quite justified. All right, it's not uncommon to find that people are overlooked for promotions, are overlooked for opportunities of career advancement when there is information regarding either prior severe mental illness or ongoing mental illness, which may actually be quite well controlled. And this contributes to why people may choose to stay silent and may not disclose. Unlike, for instance, one who says, I am physically impaired, I cannot walk, and so forth. So it's a disability that the sufferer is very often reluctant to share with the employer, or to disclose to the employer. And that's a reality for most people who have mental illness and are navigating whether or not they disclose their mental illness as a disability to the employer. So if you're an employer, if you're a manager, it's important that you understand that just because someone has not disclosed their mental health condition doesn't mean they're doing fine. What it could indicate, and what it very often indicates, is that your workplace isn't really safe for disclosure, right? It could mean that the person living with mental illness does not feel that it's safe enough for them to talk about their mental illness within the workplace, and so they'll prefer to either not disclose, to suffer in silence, and to try and make things work by themselves. So I would challenge employers, I would challenge managers to grapple with, is my workspace, is my workplace a safe environment for someone who struggles with mental illness to disclose about their mental illness in the workplace? And am I creating a culture of safety? And this goes beyond posters and promotions and wellness days and so on. This speaks to daily considerations. For instance, how is my workplace accommodating, right, to those who live with mental illness? What reasonable accommodations am I open to, right? Do I have a culture that says you're either well enough to work here all day, or you're not fit, then you should be at home? Or am I open to accommodations that would, include things like working from home, flexible hours, being open to someone saying, I can't work in an open plan environment, my anxiety doesn't allow it. So being open to that and making those considerations for reasonable accommodations. Because mental illness does not become only valid when someone discloses it. The culture within the workplace creates that safe environment for people who live with mental illness to disclose about their mental illness to their employer. So if we do want truly inclusive workplaces, I think it's important that we get out of the mindset that we want proof of the mental illness, or that we want the rigid kind of considerations that we apply to other kinds of disability, and become open to the fact that, people who live with mental illnesses perhaps face challenges that are unique and that go beyond just the normal considerations that one might make for physical impairment, and building that culture of trust, right? So I think this is my challenge to you as an employer, to think through things like that, as a manager, to think through even your leadership style, and just how inclusive is it to someone who lives with mental illness. And if you're struggling with mental illness, I think it's important that you discuss these concerns with your provider, whether it's your psychiatrist, your general practitioner, or even mental health nurse, and so on, your psychologist. So it's important that you discuss these considerations. And if communications need to be made with the employer, if you want to talk with your provider about disclosure to your employer, that you have those discussions. Your mental health matters. It's important that you feel that sense of inclusion within your workplace, and remember that when you come into the workplace, you bring all of you bring the whole being of you, and this includes if you live with a mental illness, your mental illness, and so keep well. And I hope that was food for thought, and yes,